Okay, it's recording. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting Fleet Science Center and IDW partnership panel for Comic-Con at Home. My name is Andrea Decker, and I work at the Fleet Science Center, which is a nonprofit organization in San Diego, California, in beautiful Balboa Park. Our mission is to connect everybody in San Diego County to the power and possibilities of science to create a better world. And we hope with this panel we might reach more people than San Diego County. So I hope we'll have a reach beyond San Diego County. Maybe we'll go worldwide. That would be super awesome. I'm very excited to partner again with IDW. It's a comic book publishing company here in San Diego. We've had the pleasure of working together for a number of years now on these sort of panels where we cross over pop culture with science. There's a lot of science in pop culture. Not everybody realizes how much science there is in pop culture, and we love exploring that and have some fun with it. So today I have some wonderful panelists with me. They will talk about their work, and then I also have two San Diego scientists with us and an engineer. So I'm very excited to get this started and get everybody introduced. So we're going to start. I'm going to call on you. I'm going to go around what my screen looked like, and we're going to start with Cavan.
Hello there. So I'm Cavan Scott. I'm over here in the UK. Usually over San Diego once a year, but I'm doing it remotely this year. I have been writing in basically everything I loved when I was 10. I still work in today, which is wonderful because it means my to-do list hasn't changed for 30 years. So I started writing for Doctor Who 20 years ago, and for IDW have written Star Trek, Star Wars, and most recently Back to the Future and Transformers.
Thank you so much, Kevin. John, I'll throw it over to you.
I'm John Barber. I'm the editor-in-chief at IDW. I'm down here in San Diego as well, and I've written a lot of Transformers and Back to the Future comics in the past. I'm not writing this one, obviously. Cavan is, but I think that's why I'm here. And I love these panels, and I love being here and talking about science and comics.
Thank you, John. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Will. I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at San Diego City College, and I'm the resident astronomer at the Fleet Science Center. And I am a proud nerd. I love talking about the connection between science and pop culture. I've been obsessed with Star Wars and Star Trek since I was a kid. I love Doctor Who. Back to the Future is a huge influence on how people actually perceive time travel in popular culture, and so I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Lisa. Juan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Samu. I'm a comic artist, penciler, and inker. In 10 years ago, maybe I'm working in professional comics, and I made covers and interiors for IDW with comic series like Black Panther, Mask, one comic series inspired in a cartoon series of the 80s. And now I'm with Back to the Future stuff. And I'm very happy. I'm very happy, very comfortable with this kind of script and history. Very, very well. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Juan. Sarah, you're next up.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am an engineer and I teach kids how to build robots. And I think I have to show the robot dress just because it's so fun. So I'll show you what the dress looks like, and then I'll show you without the dress. But there it is, the magic.
It is so amazing.
So I built this because I was a lonely kid, and I would imagine myself with a magical dress. And then I became an engineer and realized it didn't have to be magic.
Oh my God.
And so it forces people to hug me. It might get awkward, but that's okay. And that's what it looks like without the dress.
That is so amazing.
So I like the saying, I don't remember who said it, but the only difference between science fiction and reality is time. I thought that's pretty fun.
It is. It's a very good quote. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, with that, we're going to dive right in. I would like to start with the writing team here. I would like to know, if you don't mind, especially given your background, you've written for Transformers, you've written for Back to the Future, we have Doctor Who in the mix. All of those have one thing in common, which is space and time travel. When was the last time you checked with a local university or scientist if you've got the time travel thing right?
Are you answering that, John, or am I? Because now I feel.
Oh, I don't know. Do you want to go first?
Oh, go on then. The actual time travel aspect of it, I don't check very often because that makes my head hurt. I've checked other aspects of the writing before. So if I'm dealing with a particular form of science in the creatures, if I'm writing something for Doctor Who or Star Wars, the biology, I quite often check with that. Equipment as well, and especially when you're dealing with equipment that doesn't really exist in any way. I've checked on various aspects. I used to be a technology and science journalist, so I have a background in research. So the only trouble sometimes that you end up going down a rabbit hole and you end up getting too excited about what you're reading about or asking about that you forget you're supposed to be writing about Time Lords and time travelers and big robots. So yeah, time travel itself, not so much. I think sometimes with time travel, I deal with it more as a logic problem of, because you have to keep in track, especially when time keeps changing in a story, you have to keep track, where was that person when this happened and what is the consequence of that. But yeah, definitely when it comes to the technologies used, that's when I talk to scientists and engineers.
Awesome. John, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with something like Back to the Future, it's like it has its own established physics for how time travel works and when those rules get broken. You know, so and when I was working on Back to the Future, like I was working with Bob Gale, who wrote the movie, so he was the head scientist. If he said that's how time travel worked, that's how time travel worked. You know, he knows that universe better than anybody except maybe Bob Zemeckis. You know, but in other stuff, I've used time travel. I don't know. I've tended to not go out to universities. I do try to read a lot and keep up with stuff, but I always say that I have a comic book writer's knowledge of this stuff, not a real knowledge. You know, so like I look at the stuff and I'm like, oh, if that were the case, maybe you could do this and maybe you could fudge these details. But a lot of it comes from, for me, comes from the real, like some real genesis of it. And the other part is my wife is a scientist. Like she actually is studying cancer and does this professionally. So there have been times, and there has been stuff that's made it into comics and actually even made it into movies. That's been stuff that it has a genesis of me asking my wife what somebody would really do, or what, like that kind of stuff. So I do that occasionally, but that's definitely more on the biological side rather than the time travel side. I have a friend who's one of my best friends from high school. I'm still friends with. He is a physicist. So every once in a while I will ask like crazy physics questions because he enjoys those, and see if there's something that, can spin off into something bizarre and fun.
That's what I always liked about the stories that IDW does. They actually do ask some of the questions, but how do you balance having, at least if not accurate science, because, we haven't figured out time travel yet, I think, but we'll learn from Lisa about that later. How do you balance having some believable science in there and the story, right? Can it conflict sometimes?
I think sometimes you can get so, as I said, tied up and fascinated by the real science and the real world aspect of it, that you don't want it to become just a lecture, and that's always a danger. But it's balanced actually by the very nature of these properties that we're working on, because all of them, Back to the Future, Transformers, Star Wars, Doctor Who, they're all adventure stories, and so it's there to make the science believable, but it's not there to absolutely be, you know, exactly what would happen. And I think you can, and I think the audience know that. I mean, it's interesting from the point of view of Doctor Who, it was absolutely created as an educational program. It was, you know, that's why it alternated in the first series. It would to be a science fiction story, then a historical story, that science fiction story, and historical story. But then you actually get into the science of the Doctor and everything starts to get a little bit confusing. But yeah, all of these things are adventure stories. So I think as long as it makes it believable, so, you know, and there's an element of science fantasy as well in this. We always talk about science fiction, but there's a big genre of science fantasy, which is based on science, but doesn't necessarily always follow the rules.
So let's talk. Yeah, John, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was gonna say, sometimes, you know, I mean, stuff can really, you know, it can serve as, because we have so many things that are over the top, like there's something like Transformers is you know, human experience pushed to a far degree, you know, like they don't have a war, they have a war that goes for 4 million years and destroys their planet. And, you know, like I spent a lot of time when I was working on it, you know, involving like black holes in there, and you know, that is a thing that is so heavy and weighs things down so much that not even light can escape it. And that's a, you know, like that's a thing that is the story encompassed into some piece of it. So when you can use those sort of things to reveal character, or reveal the themes, or reveal, you know, the adventure, like Cavan said, you know, like that's where it all fits together. And I think if you're sitting there trying to fight, something's not gonna work right. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So it seems like science is inspiring this fantasy aspect of things. Do you guys ever, is it ever difficult to stay consistent within the fantasy? And have you ever found that, like, as you're developing your fantasy world, you might have contradicted yourself earlier and then having to fix all that?
Well, it happens all the time. You know, it's because when you make sometimes a lot of it is because you have to come up with a solution to a problem that you've created yourself, and so you've got to try and then find a plausible way to make it work, and to get yourself out of that corner that you've wonderfully backed yourself into. Then you have the added thing that for a lot of these properties and these franchises, they've been around for 30, 40 years, and so there is a weight of knowledge there. So not only are you researching the science and the history of the real world, you're also researching the science of Cybertron, or you're researching the history of Cybertron, or you know, or Doc Brown's science and his personal history as well. So there's loads of ways you can trip yourself up all the time. But that's where the fun comes from, because when you're writing fiction, probably just the same way as when you're working on a scientific problem, those problems bring the most creative solutions, because you realize you have to find something, and you have to convince people that, you know, this is the way the world works. And so they make you hit your head against the table quite a lot, but they're always the most fun aspect of the job, because yeah, that's when the most creative aspects come from.
That was a great question. I love that. Thanks, Sarah. So Lisa, you've been a fan of science fiction for a long time, and you know all the stories from Back to the Future to Doctor Who and all of it. What is your take as a physicist and astronomer, as using these stories maybe as a teaching tool, or how did it inspire you to get into science? What is your connection?
Well, I always remember the first time I actually knew that we hadn't gone out into space and that like interstellar space travel wasn't real was when I looked up the planet Vulcan in the encyclopedia as a kid and realized there was no planet Vulcan, and that it was some sort of like god of the forge or something like that. And it was really just a huge disappointment to me, because I actually was embedded in Star Trek before I started. And that's actually what inspired me to start looking out into the universe. And so I actually directly credit science fiction to making me interested, and started exploring. And then, so then I started reading up on planets and stuff like that. So I actually think it's a great teaching tool. And so I've done panels at Comic-Con, and, you know, we do the Star Wars Night at the Fleet whenever a new movie premieres, and all those things, because I think it is a wonderful cultural touchstone to bring people and get people interested in science. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to make those connections.
And when can you promise us time travel? I need to know. I have problems I need to solve back and forward.
I can only promise you time travel into the future, because we will be further into the future by the end of this sentence than we were when I started it. So time travel is definitely possible currently, but it's just we're all locked in at the same rate together. It's whether or not any of us can progress at a different rate and what direction we can go in. That's still up for grabs. I can't give you any definitive answers on that today. Sorry.
So if you ask that question to a flippant writer, we would say something like yesterday, you know, but that makes a lot more sense.
Like everybody's figured out a way to slow down time for the last, like, what, 3 months or so. Like I think everybody.
Yeah. I have no idea how time is working right now. It's really weird right now.
Yeah, I can't keep the days quite straight most of the time. So what is really exciting about this panel, because we get the opportunity to be among the first to talk about the new comic series that IDW is bringing out, which is a crossover between Back to the Future and Transformers, and boom, mind blown. It's crazy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So it's a story that starts around the time of the sort of the end of the first Back to the Future movie, and Marty sees Doc Brown roaring off into the future, and then some odd things happen with giant robots appearing, and the time machine returns and promptly transforms into an Autobot. Marty's a little bit surprised by this for obvious reasons. So yeah, it's crashing together these two worlds, but which both are products of the 80s, and it just seems to work very, very well. And you have the time machine that Doc Brown invented has been replaced by an Autobot called Gigawatt, who's an Autobot scientist, and they're searching for Doc.
An Autobot scientist?
Well, yes, he is. The interesting thing about Transformers is that they have this, for robots, they have this moral conflict going on all the time. You've obviously got the war. So he's a scientist in the middle of the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, and has been perhaps, say, a little fluid in which side he's belonged to at different parts of the conflict. And that's what brings all the different parts of the story together.
I can't wait. That sounds fascinating. But that also brings up an engineering question for me on robots. So Sora has shown us this amazing robot dress. And Sora, when do you think your car will transform into a time machine, or say a robot that will, defend you in times of crisis?
So unfortunately, I don't know if anyone had seen the giant robot fight that was between America and Japan, but I was the color commentator on that. And I was also a contestant on the Robot Combat League. And so those were also 8-foot humanoid robots fighting other 8-foot humanoid robots. I was the worst fighter, by the way. I'm 12 out of 12. We got knocked out in 30 seconds. I cried. Anyways, so the reality is that the movies make it look like these gigantic robots are going to be quick and fighting and whatnot. The reality is that they're very slow because they're giant, and it would take so much power to actually be able to do that. So unless we can create a lot more power, maybe it can go a little bit faster. But as it is now, the giant robots are like this. So it's so sad because it doesn't translate on TV as what people would expect. But I will say though, in the live action of seeing these gigantic robots, it is really cool. I was really privileged to be able to see all that, but it doesn't translate, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It just looks a little awkward. So we're a little bit far away from gigantic robots moving as fluidly as they do in the comics and movies.
Where are we with robots today? So, I mean, your dress is amazing and it moves very fluidly, right? And it moves not super slow, it moves quickly.
But it's also a lot smaller than the 16 feet robots.
Yeah.
Where are we currently is a good,
yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question. There's a lot going on in robotics.
What are you most excited about to see in the next 5 or 10 years? Maybe that's a little bit easier.
Autonomous cars are pretty interesting right now, and seeing how that's going to play out and interact with each other. So I'm interested in seeing that come into play.
Yeah, do you think we'll have all of us a self-driving car within maybe say 10 years? Would that be possible?
Somebody said that kids born in 2020, so now, won't have a driving license by 2036, I guess.
Oh, wow.
So that was somebody's theory putting out there. That would be interesting. It's going to be like riding a horse. I mean, somebody's going to have to go out of their way to try to learn how to drive a car.
Yeah.
But everything will be autonomous. I don't know about that. That seems a little bit soon, in my opinion. But
I would think so. Yeah, sounds a little quick to me, which brings me to another question about like robots and aliens, because the Transformers are a mix, right? I mean, they're robotic, but they're sentient beings from space. Sorry, I was just going there with something. And I completely lost my train of thought. That's how amazing that sometimes is. Lisa, let's go.
Artificial intelligence going to take over robots? What's singularity going to happen?
Well, that's actually my question. When do the self-driving cars realize they don't need us? You know, like
that's where I was going to go with that. Thanks, John.
I actually don't know. I don't know if that's really going to happen. I know there's a lot of people that do believe that's going to happen, but I mean, I feel like it's all limited by how humans program it. I understand that AI can learn, but it's still going to have a limitation to like the physical thing that it's in. So a toaster is not suddenly going to be able to like be self-aware, for example. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the self-driving car is going to drive everybody off a cliff. Who knows?
I think the worrying thing for a writer is that we're seeing more and more the science overtaking the science fiction. And I remember when I started out writing, you had things that, you know, the concept of a phone being able to do everything that our phones do now was, I mean, phones were always a problem because they, you know, in writing, because they mean that you can get out of trouble by going help. But now they can really, really mess up your storyline because I've got to find something out. Well, hang on a minute, I can do that. You know, I've got to locate someone. Hang on, I can do that. And now that you have an app for everything, again, it's that problem that you've got to make. It's a good thing because you've got to find different solutions, and the solution can't always just be, I've dropped my phone. Yeah, I mean, I remember going back, you know, when I was a tech journalist, you know, and seeing sort of Sony's first sort of Aibo robot dog, which I had over in the UK for a while to test. And that sort of blew our minds that, you know, this was it. But, you know, and then at even that point, we were going, well, hang on, that means we're not, you know, we're not that far away from the stuff that we're writing about now. And when on the Star Wars side, when you've got droids and there's all different kind of conversations about what droids are in Star Wars and what the jobs they do and those kind of things as well. But now we literally have robots hoover in our houses and vacuum in our houses, you know, and it's moving at such a pace that we're as writers having to try and get ahead of it. And I think that can be problematic at times, but for the best possible reasons.
Where did you get the imagination to come up with the next big thing that the scientists and engineers can actually bring to life?
I know, stop it, eh? Come on, think of the poor writers and artists. You know, we're here struggling while you're doing wonderful, wonderful things that are going to push forward the human race. And we're going, for heaven's sake, I've now got to change the way my robot works. But, you know, I'd much rather it was that way around, to be honest.
Sarah, when you were designing your fighting robots and the dress, is there ever a time when you look to pop culture and things that have been designed in stories, robots, for example, that guide you in your designs?
I will say, okay, first off, I didn't design the giant robots, but in terms of like the robot dress, I mean, when I came up with that idea, it was when I didn't think it could actually happen. I just decided it was just magic. And it was only later by accident, you know, I just liked math and physics that I realized that it doesn't have to be magic. And then it kind of came into fruition from there, and with the help of a whole bunch of engineers. But so, I mean, for me, it's just, I live in my imagination a lot of times, and I make up stuff, and then later figure out if it can actually happen or not. Something I do want to share, I don't know if this is really how relevant this is, but I do sometimes like think about how, if we're ever going to travel in space for a long amount of time, we're going to have to be able to be isolated for a long amount of time. And so I wonder if cell phones are a way for us to evolve to be able to be in confined spaces, but still be able to connect with one another. And then the next step from there is like, can you be in the little box and then have these little like visuals that keep you sustained psychologically? And then maybe we are in a simulation. I don't know. I feel like these things eventually progress into maybe this has all happened before.
I'm going to throw that one to Lisa. Since we're talking about space travel, how long it takes and what a toll it might take on people. I think you have some thoughts on that.
Well, it is interesting when we talk about as fast as we've been able to travel so far. The fastest spacecraft we've ever launched off the pad was the New Horizons spacecraft that got out to Pluto. And we launched it in 2006. It crossed the orbit of the moon in 9 hours. It crossed the orbit of Jupiter in a year, but it still took from 2006 to 2015 to get out to Pluto. And so, and that was as fast as we ever launched anything off the pad. And then the current fastest spacecraft that we will have is the Parker Solar Probe, which is in orbit around the sun. And it is still going, its maximum speed is still going to be way less than a fraction of the speed of light. I mean, it's like tiny, tiny, tiny speeds. So when we talk about feasible space travel, unless we can actually get something to break the laws of physics as we currently understand them, to be able to get any appreciable distance, we're talking things like generation ships and stuff like that, where we would have to bring a whole bunch of people. The talk about cell phones and isolation, however, I think we're doing kind of a worldwide experiment in that right now. So it's interesting to see how technology actually can help us feel more connected and might be able to help us feel less isolated for, say, astronauts perhaps on a voyage to Mars, which is still going to take about a year with the best estimates just to get there, so it is a very interesting thing. But yeah, unless we can actually get some stuff to work within the confines of comic book physics, we're kind of confined here for a while.
Damn it, I really want to go out to space. Since we touched a little bit on creativity, I want to throw it over to Juan, and maybe John can pull up some artwork that Juan has done for the new Transformer Back to the Future. Because Juan, you as an artist, you have to have the imagination to draw technology that is not yet available. How do you imagine these things, and how does that work?
Well, with a lot of quantity of coffee. For no talk about all the kind of things of drugs. No, it's a joke. It's like the other comments, another comments. All my life, I draw all kind of things around pop culture of cartoons, comics, and all in way of robots, mechas, of Japanese culture, of all kind of TV shows, or like Star Trek or Doctor Who, or all kind of movie with machines and space. For me, it's beautiful. All my life, I'm really fan of all kind of things, and this lot of information around my life give me the tools for easily draw this works propose me IDW, for example, and for do it only you need I don't remember the word storytelling. You have good storytelling, and if you have the tools for draw acceptable science fiction, it's okay. And for IDW, for me, and for the script writer, it's okay, and all is good. Very, very well for me. I'm very happy on working this series.
So
for me, it's like time travel to 80s, to my 8 years. I'm 40, and for me, in 80s, in Back to the Future moment, I have 8 years, and for me, it's like time travel.
So there's always a story before you draw, or is it sometimes reversed? You draw and then John and Kevin come up with a story, or is it always the story first?
Cavan? Or for me?
For both of you.
For me, it's the first thing is the writer, and the writer and the editor give me the script, and I think about do this amazing history, and I do, and when I have the sketch, I send to the other people, and we're talking about the feedback.
Yeah, it's one of the most exciting thing about working in comics is the fact it's a conversation. It's not just you know, I write both comics and prose and novels, and you know, while you have editors and working in novels, yes, it is part of being a group. It's still a very solitary creative experience. With a comic script is never supposed to be for the final reader. A comic strip is for the artist. So when I'm writing Transformers Back to the Future, it's for Juan. You know, so I talk directly to him in the script and have to explain what I'm imagining in a way that, you know, I can't really draw, you know, and I get a general idea. So I'm quite often saying, this is what I'm thinking. And then the artist and Juan come, you know, they come back with these most amazing things. And likewise, what's in the script doesn't become, it's not suddenly in stone. You know, if the script goes over and the artist comes up with a great idea, you know, between the two of us and the editors, you know, we mold the story to sort of fit that as well. So it's definitely a collaboration.
John, can you pull up that artwork one more time? Sorry, it was so short. I'd like to kind of explore that for a second.
Yeah, so I didn't want to cover up one. I actually had a question.
Good call.
Oh, wait, where'd he go? There you go. If you know, like, I had a question for Juan and Sora, really, that like one of the things that I think is an interesting link between comic book art is when it comes to Transformers and the engineering is like, you see how Gigawatt is moving there, right? Like he's based on a toy, and the toy has to, you know, physically be engineered to change between the car and the robot mode. But here, you know, the way Juan's drawn him, he's acting like a person. He looks like a real person with emotions, and that seems similar to what Sora was saying about the way robots behave in engineering, that they move slower, they don't move the way you expect them to. I wonder how everybody overcomes that, or if I'm imagining a link there, or if it's a real thing.
My computer just froze and I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
It was really good. All right, should I try again?
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
Okay. My question for Juan and Sora was, when you look at Juan's art here, Gigawatt, the transformer, he's based on a toy. So there's a toy that has to be engineered and actually has to change between a car and a robot. But the way Juan's drawn him, he looks like a person. His movement, you know, the way his posture, the way he's standing, you can see emotion and action in it that's human-like. And that it seems to me that like that's similar to what Sarah was saying about the robots moving slowly or not moving the natural way you'd think. That's something I think has to get kind of overcome on both an engineering, like a real life engineering science level, but also an artistic level when you're drawing them. Am I imagining that, or is that like a real thing?
I think that's true. There are really good examples of pneumatic pumps making a lot of really nice fluid motions and whatnot, but then they're always like attached to this gigantic box on the side, and it's not like this compact, like self-containing thing. But I've seen progress in that area of making them a lot smaller so that there is more fluid motion. And then with the dress, I mean, the engineer that designed the actual mechanism was just really clever at making the pieces curved, so it created that fluid motion. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of progress to be made, and people can have creative ways to solve it. I remember even in the dress one, I had a certain idea of how it should be made, and he created these like segments. And I remember in the meeting, I was like, how is something with like these segments going to create fluid motion? And I was using my arm, and then I realized, oh wait, my arm also has, okay. So, so I mean, I mean, it's not impossible. We just have to make more progress in those areas and be clever about it. I mean,
talking about the sort of the human element of the Transformers, that's what I've always loved about Transformers. It's a very, back again when I was working as a journalist, and I used to cover a lot of robotics and travel back and forth to Tokyo, I always found it really telling that the Japanese attitude to robots was one of wonder and amazement, and these things are going to do amazing things. Whereas in the West, we had Terminators and Cybermen and Borg and basically everything that will kill you. Yes. And what we've got in Transformers, because it's a melding of the two, you know, the original Transformers were Japanese toys with American storytelling. But again, you've got that sort of concept through Transformers that, yeah, there are Decepticons, there are bad guys, there is Megatron. But on a whole, it's the heroic, you know, the heroes that we vouch for aren't so much the humans, they're the machines that are going to save us. And I've always liked that way of looking at technology. And I suppose what we do have in all of these things we've been talking about in Back to the Future with Doc Brown, in Star Trek with Spock, Doctor Who with the Doctor, the scientists are actually the good guys in them as well, you know, and the scientists are the ones in all of those franchises, are the ones that people want to aspire to. And I'm always fascinated as a fan of these things who's not a scientist, how much characters like Spock and Doc Brown and the Doctor are inspiration for real life scientists, because, you know, at the end of the day, they're the coolest characters in all these shows and films. And the same in Transformers, you know, you've got the Autobot scientists, and in this one we have an Autobot scientist as the hero. And so for the scientists and the engineers in the room, I'm really interested in how were these heroes of yours when you were first getting into this area?
That's a really interesting question, because I think, you know, just due to the pervasiveness of pop culture versus knowing any real scientists in real life, you know, someone like Spock would have been a much bigger influence on me than any real scientist would have been, honestly. And so it is gratifying to see scientists portrayed in a positive light. Not that scientists haven't been complicit in awful things. But I think particularly right now, we're, at least here in the States, we're living through a time period where suspicion of science is actually really having some major impacts on all of our lives. Like wear a mask, wash your hands, it's not that hard. And so having scientists that kids and adults can read these comics and grow up and be secure and comforted and know that these are the good guys, I actually think is kind of important right now.
Yeah, I think that's an easy trap to fall into in storytelling, is making science the bad guy, just by the nature of the way stories are told. That, especially if you have a continuing character, you know, like a Doctor Who or like, you know, like a Marty McFly, whatever. the character that shows up that isn't the main character or the main set of characters it usually is the bad guy. Like, that's just the mechanics of how the story is. And it's easy to fall into a trap of making science the bad guy. I mean, I was joking about the cars earlier, but I was actually seeing that more from the cars point of view. I don't know if you follow the news, but humanity is terrible. If I was a car, I would, you know, like, I wouldn't necessarily be on our side. But like that, yeah, that reality of like trying to make the, you're right. There are bad things that have happened with science, but there's also so many, you know, we certainly wouldn't be here talking if it were not for science, in a zillion ways. And that mistrust, I think it's really easy, I think, for fiction to fall into a trap of fostering that mistrust of science and building up things that aren't just aren't.
I mean, I'm going to say it's okay that there is both sides being shown, right? I mean, because you need there to be a bit of ethics going on when you start developing and thinking about new ways of building. Right now, I work with the Howard Jalou Data Science Institute at UCSD, and you know, the ethics around how you're gathering data and how you associate that is really important moving forward, because you could, you know, create a lot of misinformation otherwise. And so, on one hand, it is sad, you know, with the Terminator and how that's actually made people really, really unnecessarily scared of things like Skynet and whatnot. But then at the same time, maybe it's not so bad to just make sure you're thinking of what's the worst case scenario if I build this, and how do you avoid that kind of trajectory?
That's absolutely true. I mean, for those of us who have gone through our graduate school programs, we know that as scientists, you seldom get taught, you seldom have an ethics course that you have to take. You get taught how to deal with an institutional review board if you want to do data collection or something like that. So that's absolutely, absolutely true. And I just think, you know, but no one's going to talk about grant writing and institutional review boards in a comic book where you want to have fun either. So, you know, there's
no, but you can talk about, that's when I think the comics and films and TV, that's where the two things can mesh and you can explore the ethics. I mean, my daughter's, one of their biggest heroes at the minute is Iron Man because of the Marvel movies. And the conversations we've had about the thing, you know, he starts off being an arms dealer, he then creates something that nearly destroys the world, and then he, you know, and how that character arc has worked. And that's conversations we would never have had, you know, if it wasn't for that. And again, I think that's throughout all of these things, that's when we've seen those conversations happen. It's happened in Star Trek, it's happened, you know, in you know, even Back to the Future, there's the concept of, you know, just because we could create a time machine, should we go and do it because it could have quite serious ramifications. So I think that's when the two areas of the creativity and the science, which is its own creativity, when we can work together.
Absolutely. And in Star Trek, you've always had the prime directive, but how many times do they accidentally or intentionally violate it? But yeah, no, I do think it is a great place to talk about this. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm glad to see it's not always the crazy mad scientist is the villain either.
Oops, that was my timer. We're at 40 minutes. We're supposed to stop at 45, so I thought I'll give us a 5-minute warning for this. But you brought up a really good aspect, Sarah, the whole ethics discussion, because that's what comics, like Kevin said, and movies have done really well in the past, right? They're a little bit of a mirror for us, for society, to say, okay, if you do this, this might be what's coming out of it. When you write stories, is kind of the morality and ethics on the forefront, or is it more the characters, and then through that you get the ethics questions? Or with what do you start, or is it a mix of things?
Well, a good story always starts with character first anyway, because you can have the coolest situation and you can have the coolest, well, look, Transformers is a good example. They are cool. They are giant robots that turn into cars and cassette players and all kinds of things, and planes and weapons and tanks, and they would be very dull if they were just standing there and transforming every 5 minutes. You know, the reason we love those characters is because they are humans. They are, you know, they have sentience, they have conversations, they have emotions, and they have ethics. You know, they at their heart of that story there is a war, and that war comes from a philosophical argument, which sound, you know, and their toys, and you know, it's all wrapped up in the same thing. So every story comes from the character, and every good character comes from the viewpoint and the conflict that they have built into them. So I think they, you know, things get very dull very quickly if all you have is just plot and people doing things because the plot says they've got to do things. Characters always have to come first.
That makes sense. Thank you. So since we're coming just about up on our time that we have, which just went by way too fast. So the time travel, we went into the future much quicker than I wanted to, Lisa. Are there any parting words that you would like to kind of share with our audience, with the fans of the comics, with maybe future scientists and engineers? Is there anything you would like to share with future artists?
I think engineering is another medium to create, and artists are engineers and engineers are artists. I just want to share that. And this thing is cool because we didn't share that while it was being recorded.
That's right, yeah.
Oh. Broke it again. It's good.
It's broken.
It is the example that hoverboards might be able to exist sometime in the near future.
Don't break it anyways.
Exactly.
No, I would tag onto what Sora just said. We tend to think of science and humanities as being two separate, distinct things, but we all operate at the intersection of them. So, you know, for those of you who are interested in going, if you're a younger person and you're interested in going into science, don't neglect your math, but don't neglect your writing skills, don't neglect your reading, and don't neglect your art and your hobbies and those things that are going to make you keep going, you know, because science is actually a creative endeavor. It might have some logical prescriptions that you have to follow, but it is a creative endeavor, and don't think about them as being separate.
Yeah, I've known a lot of people that kind of cross those lines, or yeah, I mean, I've got like, you know, two friends that have worked at JPL, and I think both of them came from an artistic background. One of them was a, you know, like, I mean, I think that's just a thing that happens. So yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I like that.
And for me, it's always, you know, my interest in science came, again, I didn't become a scientist, but I became interested in science because of the Doctor and because of Spock and because of Transformers. I love robots because of Transformers and Star Wars, you know, from the characters, but it's led me to go and find out more about actual robotics, you know, and the ethics and everything involved in. So from anyone sitting out there who loves these things and loves the battling giant robots, they are cool. There is nothing wrong with that. But also, yeah, they're a doorway into actually understanding what the real adventure is going on at the minute in our own world. And I think that's really important to follow up on.
For me, for the people dedicated to study scientists and the artists interested on do scientist things or stuff, I think if you love this, do it. If it's your choice, it's okay. If you love this, try to do it. It's very cool stuff, scientists and robotics and science fiction. It's sometimes very lovely than the reality.
Yeah. I like that as a parting wisdom. Follow your heart, do what you love, see where it takes you. I think that's perfect. With that, I want to thank our wonderful panelists for joining us today. Thank you so much, guys. For our fans here, make sure you follow the Fleet Science Center. You can visit our website, fleetscience.org. You can follow us on social media. The handle is @FleetScience. You can find us on all the popular channels, and also make sure to check out all the other wonderful panels that the Comic-Con group is putting together. There'll be a week full of pop culture celebration, and I'm really excited that you decided to join us for today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.